Now that we've finished creating a very basic required validator, the next thing we're going to do is move on to creating a slightly more complex one, which is going to be isBetween. Just as a reminder of what we are building, we're going to build the validator to check this input here. So the weight has to be between a certain number, for example 66 and 440 pounds, and it has to also consider kilograms as well. We're going to start simple now and not think about the different inputs. We're just going to think about whether the number is or is not in between the constraints. So before we do that, let's go ahead and actually think about all the use cases and all the tests we need to write. I see a few different use cases here. The first one is going to be is less than lower limit, and that's going to be invalid. We're also going to have is greater than, and that's going to be greater than the higher limit, and that one of course is going to be invalid as well. We're also going to have to consider the case of same as the lower input and then same as the higher input. And in this case, I'm going to say it's valid. So for example, if you put in 30 here, it should be valid and it is working in my demo. The next thing we're going to consider is obviously the happy path, which is where it's in between both of the inputs. And finally, we should probably consider some garbage input as well. Obviously, you cannot validate this number or this string against some numbers. So let's go ahead and start writing those test cases out, and then we're going to write the code and let the tests drive our development. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new describe block, and I'm going to pass in isBetween here. Of course, that is going to be the function that we are testing. And the first case is going to be is greater than upper limit. And this one is obviously going to return invalid, and we're going to have a useful error message as well. So let's go ahead and write that one out. I'm going to say let's say the constraints in this case. So I'm going to pass those in as arguments. Or actually, let's go ahead and just write the expectation first. So we're going to have expect actual, which is going to be some value. And that's going to be equal to an object here where the valid is false. And then we're going to have a message, and that's going to be must be between. And then we're going to put in our numbers here. So I'm just going to say 1 and 10, which is what I'm going to use for my test data. Let's go ahead now and write the function. So for example, I'd say const actual, and then we're just going to call our validator, which is going to be called is in between. The first argument here is going to be the input. I'm going to say 11, and then we're going to pass in the min and the max. So the min is going to be 1, and the max is going to be 10 in this case. Let's go ahead and save this off, and of course this is going to fail because isBetween doesn't even exist. So let's go ahead, first import it, and then we're going to define it and make it exist. So let's go ahead and create our new function up here. We're going to export a new function called isBetween. The first argument is going to be the value. Then we're going to have the min and the max as an object. And let's go ahead and just return something to get us started. In this case, I'm just going to say valid is true. This is going to be the default case. Obviously, this is still going to fail, but it is going to get rid of our error if I go ahead and save both of those files off. And we are getting the expected failure here. The next thing we're going to have to do is go ahead and write the actual code. So let's go ahead and do our comparison. So we're just going to say if value is less than minimum, or if the value is greater than the maximum value, we're going to go ahead and return our message in here. In this case, valid is going to be false, and the message is going to be, let's double check what I actually wrote, must be between 1 and 10. So in this case, it's going to be must be between, and we can use string interpolation here for max, min and max rather. So let's go ahead and do that. And finally, I need to use the correct operator there. And if we save this one off, the test hopefully is going to pass. We are getting an error apparently because I have an extra bracket over here. Let's save it off again. And this is still failing because I must be doing something wrong with my comparison. This should be greater than. And finally, our test is now passing. This is definitely a good result. Let's go ahead and write the rest of our assertions out as well and just make sure everything else is working as expected too. So we're going to say is less than lower limit. Of course, we can just go ahead and change these numbers in here. I'm just going to make it 0, and this should also be passing, and so it is. Let's go ahead and also check the case where it's exactly the same as the upper and lower limit. So it's going to be is same as lower limit. This one, of course, should also pass. So I'm just going to make it 1 in here. This one is going to be true, and there's going to be no error message. And that one is passing too. And we may as well just cover off all the cases while we're here. We're going to say is same as upper limit. And this one, of course, should hopefully pass as well. Definitely a good result. Let's go ahead and test the very final path, which is going to be is irrelevant input. So I'm going to say is not a valid number. And let's just put in some garbage and see what happens here. And this is going to return, apparently it is going to return true. This is definitely not correct. So we should probably go ahead and fix this one up as well. What we can do is add some more validation up here. So I'm going to do that immediately at the top. And we're just going to check if this is a valid number. So I'm going to call pass int. We're just going to use ints here. We're not going to bother with floats. And I'm going to pass in my value. And we're going to see if this is a number. So we can do that by using isNaN. So I can just say, let's go ahead and say isNaN in here, isNaN, and pass in the value. And depending on the result here, we can go ahead and return true or false. I'm going to do something very similar here. We're going to change the error message, however. I'm just going to make this into a different error message. So in this case, it must be a number. Let's see what happens if I save this one off now. And if I've done everything correctly, we should get a different error, and that is working as expected. So let's go ahead and actually fix up our testing here. Valid should be false, and the message is going to be must be a number. And if we save this one off, everything should be passing. And with that, we've completed our second validator.